was supposed to be an ordinary family dinner. The pot roast was steaming in the center of the table, the glasses were half full, and a basket of fresh rolls sat untouched. The kind of scene people share online to prove their family is perfect and intact. Then my daughter's husband said it, his voice sharp enough to split bone. "You're nothing but dead weight in this house." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The words didn't echo, they landed heavy. Final. My fork slipped against the plate with a harsh clink. Across from me, my daughter, my only child, didn't flinch. She didn't defend me. Didn't correct him. She just turned her eyes down to her wine glass, swirling the red as if it could somehow dissolve the moment entirely. I stayed quiet, not out of weakness, but because in moments like these, silence carries more weight than shouting ever could. They mistook my silence for surrender. They assumed I would continue swallowing every insult the way I had endured the last few years of cold shoulders, whispered remarks, and doors closing in my face in my own home. But they were wrong, and they would soon understand the cost of mistaking my silence for weakness. The room fell into that uncomfortable stillness where every small sound feels like an intrusion, the scrape of a knife against porcelain, the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room, the clock ticking steadily on the wall, marking seconds that felt like judgments. I could feel the pulse in my temple, a slow, steady drum. But outwardly, I remained still, my face impassive, as though I had heard nothing at all. My son-in-law, Robert, shifted in his chair with a satisfied little smile, the kind of smirk someone wears when they know they've struck exactly where it hurts. My daughter, Amanda, finally lifted her eyes to meet mine for a brief moment. There was no apology there. No shame, just the hollow look of a woman too tired or too cowardly to stand up for her mother. That look cut deeper than Robert's words ever could. I laid my fork down gently, the soft clink echoing across the table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice low, calm, measured. No one moved as I pushed my chair back from the table. I walked out onto the porch. The evening air cooler than I expected, carrying with it the faint smell of rain and freshly cut grass. The cicadas had started their nightly chorus, indifferent to the fracture that had just split open inside that dining room. Out there in the quiet, I pulled out the old silver locket from around my neck. Its surface was scratched, worn from years of use, but still intact as it had always been. My mother gave me that locket when I turned 18, told me to keep your strength close, but never let others measure it. I had carried it through college, through decades of marriage, through the painful years of widowhood, through endless sacrifices to keep a roof over my daughter's head. And now here I was, standing on the porch of a house I had helped them purchase with my life's savings, being called dead weight in it. I thought back to the day Amanda first brought Robert home. He had a sweetness then, or at least I thought he did. Bright smile, polite words, quick to compliment my cooking. I remember telling myself, "She's lucky, he'll take care of her." But small cracks appear quickly if you know where to look. He started making little comments when he thought I couldn't hear. About how I watched television too loudly. About how the utility bills had skyrocketed since I moved in. About how the guest room, my room, would make a perfect home office. Each comment wasn't much on its own, but strung together, they formed a noose. And Amanda, my girl, she was raised to know better. Raised to respect her elders, to honor sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, maybe when she started getting promotions at work, when Robert's influence grew stronger, she started to pull away. She still called me Mom, still asked me to help plan holiday meals. But her eyes would wander when I spoke, and her visits to my room grew shorter each month. I leaned against the porch railing, listening to the muted sounds of conversation from inside. They didn't wait for me. They kept eating as though I were nothing more than an empty chair. For a brief moment, I felt the sting of tears press at the corners of my eyes. Not for myself, but for the girl I raised. The girl who once climbed into my bed during thunderstorms, who used to leave little notes in my purse saying, "I love you, Mom." That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who sat in silence while her husband gutted me with words. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I closed the locket with a soft click. Time had run out for my patience. When I stepped back inside, no one looked up. Robert was laughing at something on his phone, and Amanda was chewing slowly, lost in thought. I walked past them, past the dining room, and down the hall to my bedroom. The smell of lavender and old books greeted me, comforting in its familiarity. I sat down at the small desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out a folder I hadn't touched in years. Deeds, bank statements, contracts, all of them bore my name. All of them proved that I was far from the dead weight he painted me to be. I ran a hand over the documents, my fingers tracing the embossed seals. My mind began to work, slow and steady, like an engine long dormant sparking back to life. Robert and Amanda thought they had the upper hand, thought I was just a shadow in their home, tolerated out of obligation. But the truth was different. The truth was, power still sat quietly in my hands, waiting. The next morning, as the sun pushed through the curtains, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. Lines carved deep into my face told stories of labor, of loss, of years carried heavily, but behind the weariness I saw something else, resolve. I thought of Robert's smirk, Amanda's downcast eyes, and I felt a flame rekindle. They thought silence meant surrender. They had no idea that silence was just the first move. At breakfast, Amanda barely acknowledged me, scrolling through her phone as Robert rattled off plans about renovations, about finally making this place truly ours. He said it with that casual arrogance, as though the walls were already theirs to paint, the land theirs to mortgage. I sipped my coffee, letting the bitterness sit on my tongue. "And how do you plan to afford all that?" I asked. Amanda glanced at Robert, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He smiled, saccharine and sharp. "Oh, we'll figure it out. Amanda's already talking to the bank. We'll make it happen." I set my mug down. "Interesting," I said simply. His smile faltered just a little. Amanda cleared her throat, muttered something about being late for work, and left the table. Robert followed soon after, his shoes clicking like hammers against the floor. As the door shut, I leaned back in my chair. A seed of chaos had already been planted. They didn't know yet that the bank would come back to them empty-handed, because this house, this land, every brick of it was still partially mine. They thought me old, irrelevant, a burden, but I was about to remind them that a woman doesn't spend 63 years building a life just to be erased by silence and disrespect. And so part one of my reckoning began, not with shouting, not with tears, but with the quiet gathering of truths. The kind of truths that, when revealed, bring entire facades crashing down. The locket felt cool against my skin, long after Amanda and Robert had left the house that morning. I sat alone at the kitchen table, the silence of the empty room pressing in around me. The words from the night before were still there, lodged under my skin like a splinter. Dead weight. I turned the word over in my mind, testing it against the years I had given, the sacrifices carved into my bones. If I were dead weight, then what did that make of a down payment I provided when Amanda and Robert couldn't qualify for the mortgage on their own? What did that make of the childcare I provided for free when their son Michael was born? What did that make of the meals I cooked, the laundry I folded, the garden I tended while they built their careers? Memory can be cruel. It never asks permission before it surfaces. As I sat there, the smell of coffee lingering faintly, I was pulled backward to the day Amanda was born. I remember the sterile hospital room, the squeak of nurses, shoes, and then the cry, thin, fierce, announcing life. I held her before anyone else did. Her tiny fist wrapped around my finger, and in that moment I swore I would never let her want for anything. I worked extra shifts as a nurse, saved every dime, and put aside my comfort so she would have a better start than I did. The years passed in a blur of dance recitals, science projects, and late-night talks when she was too anxious to sleep. When she turned 18, I handed her the same locket my mother once pressed into my palm. She looked at it, her eyes wide with emotion. "I'll always make you proud, Mom," she'd said. I remember the warmth in my chest, the certainty that I had done right by her. That same locket now sat around my neck, as though mocking both of us. The memory blurred with the present, and I found myself standing at the front window, watching the world move outside. A neighbor strolled by with their dog, waving. I forced a smile, raising a hand, but inside I felt hollow. To them, we probably looked like a perfect family. A nice house, a married daughter, a respectable son-in-law, a mother growing old in peace. They didn't hear the words said behind closed doors. They didn't see the way my daughter looked away instead of looking at me. By mid-morning, I knew I couldn't just sit idle. I walked to my bedroom, pulled out the folder again, and spread the papers across the desk. The deed, the trust account statements, the bank letters. They formed a silent chorus, reminding me of something important. My name wasn't erased yet. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded across my chest, and thought of Robert's smile when he said, "Our home." He thought the ink on those papers meant nothing, because time had made me soft, irrelevant. That was his mistake. The phone buzzed on the desk. Amanda. I stared at the screen for a moment before answering. Her voice was careful, as though tiptoeing around something fragile. "Mom," Robert and I were thinking. "Maybe you could sign something. Just a formality. It would help us with the bank." I let the silence stretch long enough for her to shift uncomfortably on the other end. "A formality?" I repeated, tasting the word. "And what exactly am I formalizing, Amanda?" She sighed. "Look, Mom, it's just paperwork. You wouldn't have to worry about anything. We'd handle it all." I closed my eyes. "And where would that leave me?" There was a pause, then in a softer tone. "With us. Always with us." But the words were brittle, lacking conviction. She knew it, and so did I. "I'll think about it," I said flatly, and hung up. My hand trembled slightly as I set the phone down, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of realization. My daughter, the girl who once slipped love notes into my purse, was asking me to sign myself out of my own security. She didn't see it that way, but that's exactly what it was. A neat little signature, and I would become a guest in the home I helped create, dependent on her mercy and his tolerance. I pushed the chair back and stood, pacing the small confines of my bedroom. My mind raced in waves: anger, sorrow, disbelief. Each emotion broke and receded, leaving behind a sharper edge of clarity. I thought of my late husband, his laughter in this very house, the way he'd ruffle Amanda's hair while reading her bedtime stories. What would he think if he saw this? If he saw the family we had built, reduced to cold shoulders and whispered contempt? By noon, I knew I needed counsel. Not from Amanda, not from Robert, but from someone who remembered me as more than just a burden. I dialed an old number. Patricia, a friend from my nursing days, now retired like me. Her voice came through steady as always. "Long time, stranger," she said. "Not long enough," I muttered, but my tone softened. "I need to ask you about property law." She listened as I laid it out. The house, the deed, the talk of banks, the insult at dinner. When I finished, there was a pause, then a quiet whistle. "They've got some nerve," she said. "They think you'll just fade away?" "They think I'll fold without a fight," I said. "Don't let them," Patricia replied firmly. "The house is partly yours legally. If they're trying to mortgage it without your consent, they can't without your signature. You've got more leverage than you think." Leverage. The word lodged itself in my mind. I thanked her, promised to catch up properly soon, and hung up. For the rest of the afternoon, I found myself drifting between past and present. I sat in the living room, staring at the old rocking chair Robert hated so much. I remembered nursing Amanda in it during those long midnight hours, her baby breaths rising and falling with mine. I remembered rocking her to sleep in that very chair when she had chickenpox, her small body burning with fever. Now it was just furniture, mocked, unwanted, waiting to be thrown out. As evening approached, I heard the crunch of tires on the driveway. Amanda and Robert were home. I straightened in my chair, waiting. Robert walked in first, his briefcase swinging at his side. He glanced at me. No smile, no greeting. Just a coat dropped on the counter. Amanda followed, her heels clicking against the tile. She offered a faint nod. "Mom," she said. "Daughter," I replied. Robert busied himself with the mail, flipping through envelopes until he found one that made him pause. His eyes lit briefly before he masked it. A bank logo. He tucked it under his arm quickly. "Dinner in an hour," he said curtly, disappearing into the kitchen. Amanda lingered. She looked at me as though wanting to speak, but then thought better of it. Instead, she mumbled, "Long day," and walked away. I stayed in the rocking chair, listening to the sounds of pots clattering, the muffled exchange of voices behind the kitchen door. Their world spinning, their plans moving, all while I sat invisible in plain sight. It might have hurt once, now it only sharpened my resolve. Later that night, when the house was quiet, I walked back to my bedroom. I opened the window, let the cool night air drift in, carrying the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. I spread the papers out again, but this time not just to remind myself, this time to prepare. My silence was over. The plan wasn't fully formed yet, but the shape of it glimmered at the edges of my mind. Documents, leverage, allies from my past, and patience, the one thing I had in abundance, the one weapon they would never expect. I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and whispered into the quiet room, not weakness, strategy. The words felt solid, like a vow. Upstairs, I heard their laughter, soft, conspiratorial, as if the house already belonged to them alone. I sat in the dark, my hand resting on the locket, and I smiled. They didn't know it yet, but time was on my side. The next morning began with the sound of footsteps in the hallway, hurried and clipped. I could tell by the rhythm it was Robert. His steps always struck the floor like a gavel, each one declaring control. I remained in the kitchen sipping my coffee, listening. He was on the phone, his voice hushed but firm. "Yes, I know, we'll have her signature soon. Don't worry about it. She's old. She won't resist. Just keep the numbers ready." My jaw tightened, but I didn't move. His words floated down the hallway like smoke, poisonous, invasive, clinging to everything they touched. He didn't know I could hear. Or maybe he didn't care. Either way, it confirmed what I already suspected. The papers Amanda asked me to sign weren't just formalities. They were the keys to my financial security, the equity I had built over decades. I placed the mug down gently. The spoon clinked against porcelain. That sound, small as it was, felt louder than his entire conversation. He stopped talking for a moment, perhaps realizing his voice had carried too far. Then the office door closed, muffling his tone. I leaned back in the chair, letting the quiet fill the space again. It wasn't anger I felt in that moment. It was clarity. My silence had given them confidence. They mistook patience for fragility, restraint for resignation. What they didn't understand was that silence also gave me time. Time to think, time to plan, time to prepare. When Amanda finally joined me at the table, her hair damp from the shower, her blouse half-buttoned, I watched her closely. She moved more slowly than usual, as though weighed down by something. She poured her coffee, avoided my eyes. "Big day?" I asked casually. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Meetings, deadlines, you know how it is." "I do," I said. My voice was steady, but the undertone lingered. "I also know you've been talking to the bank." The mug froze in her hand. She blinked, caught off guard. "Mom, I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by pretending otherwise. I'm old, but I'm not deaf. And I'm certainly not blind." She swallowed hard. "Set the mug down. It's just, Robert wants to renovate, start fresh. We thought—" "You thought what?" My tone sharpened. "That I'd sign away my security without a question?" The silence that followed was heavy. She shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through her damp hair. "It's not like that, Mom. We want this place to feel like ours." I leaned forward, my eyes locked on hers. "This place is partially mine, Amanda. Every brick, every board, every dollar. Yours by inheritance someday, but not now, not like this." Her shoulders slumped. For a moment, I saw the girl she used to be, caught in a lie, searching for a way out. But then the mask returned, the silence, the avoidance. She stood, muttering something about being late, and left the table. I stayed there long after she was gone, staring at the empty chair. My heart ached, not just for the betrayal but for the daughter I had lost. The girl who used to run across this kitchen floor with scraped knees, laughing, calling for me. That girl would have defended me. That girl would have never let silence serve as agreement to cruelty. The day stretched on, heavy with thought. He reached into his wallet with deliberate slowness and laid his identification on the nearby counter. State Bar Association card. State photo ID with his address in the affluent Lakeside neighborhood. Business card from the State Regulatory Commission with his title clearly printed, Lead Counsel, Commercial Compliance Division. Each item was placed with precision, like evidence being presented in a courtroom. The Bar Association card caught the afternoon light streaming through the windows. Alicia zoomed in with her phone camera, and the chat exploded with recognition. Only the most accomplished attorneys carried those credentials. I think, Marcus said, still in that maddeningly calm voice that somehow carried more menace than any shout. We need to have a conversation about your store's compliance with state regulations. Spencer's hands were shaking now, trembling like leaves in a storm. 10 years of retail experience, and he'd never encountered a situation like this. He'd discriminated against customers before, subtle actions, quiet prejudices, nothing this blatant, but never against someone with this kind of power. Sir, I apologize. He began desperately, but Marcus held up a hand with the casual authority of someone accustomed to stopping courtroom arguments with a gesture. Mr. Spencer, your apology is premature. You don't yet understand the full scope of what's happened here today. He reached for his phone and dialed a number from memory. The call connected immediately, as calls to powerful attorneys often do. Commissioner Thompson's office, please. This is Marcus Johnson. The boutique held its collective breath. Commissioner Thompson was a name that appeared in local newspapers. Someone who moved policy with single decisions, and whose opinions shaped regulations at the highest levels. After a brief hold, Marcus spoke again. Sandra, I'm at the Pinnacle Boutique conducting that unscheduled compliance evaluation we discussed last week. The results are quite illuminating. A pause. The silence was deafening. Yes, I'm putting you on speaker. I think the staff here needs to hear this conversation. Marcus placed the phone on the marble counter. A crisp, authoritative voice filled the boutique, each word carrying the weight of official authority. Marcus, what's the situation on the ground? I've just spent the last 40 minutes being systematically discriminated against by store owner Richard Spencer, who attempted to have security forcibly remove me from the premises. He suggested I'd be more comfortable at a community legal aid office down the street. Silence from the phone, a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. I beg your pardon. Did you say you were discriminated against? Spencer's career flashed before his eyes like a drowning person's life. 10 years of building his business, and he was about to lose it all in spectacular public fashion. Furthermore, Marcus continued, his voice carrying clearly through the hushed boutique, when I attempted to provide proper identification and explain my purpose here, Mr. Spencer escalated the situation, instructing security to use whatever force necessary to remove me from the building. Whatever force necessary. Thompson's voice carried the chill of an Arctic wind. Each word was articulated with precision. Against the lead counsel who drafted our state's commercial regulations. Miller wanted to disappear into the floor, to melt into the marble and become part of the architecture. He'd been ordered to use force against one of the most powerful attorneys in the state. The live stream viewers were now pushing 2,000 timing by the minute. Someone had posted the link on Reddit, and the story was spreading like wildfire across social media platforms. Hashtag Pinnacle Boutique was trending on Twitter, alongside hashtag Shopping While Black. Mr. Spencer, Thompson's voice continued through the phone, each syllable cutting like a scalpel. Are you present and able to respond? Spencer's voice came out as a croak. Yes, ma'am, I'm here. Are these allegations accurate? Did you attempt to have Mr. Johnson removed from your establishment? Spencer looked around the boutique desperately. Dozens of witnesses with phones raised. Multiple live streams broadcasting to thousands. Security cameras recording everything from multiple angles. Denial was not just impossible, it was career suicide. There may have been a serious miscommunication, he whispered, his voice barely audible. A miscommunication? Thompson's voice could have frozen lava. By afternoon, I had resolved that waiting was no longer enough. I walked to my bedroom, pulled the drawer open, and laid the documents out once more. This time, I didn't just look. I acted. I opened my laptop, began scanning the pages, storing them digitally, and creating copies. Every line, every signature preserved. Insurance, proof, ammunition. As the printer hummed, I thought of Patricia's words. Leverage. I wasn't just sitting on a deed. I was sitting on a fortress. They thought they could storm it with charm, with pressure, with silence. They had no idea the gates were locked, and I held every key. By evening, Amanda knocked on my bedroom door. She never knocked before. That alone told me something. I closed the folder, slid it aside, and called, "Come in." She entered, her smile painted, her voice sweetened with sugar that didn't reach her eyes. "Dinner's ready," she said. I looked at her, silent. She shifted under the weight of it, her confidence faltering just a little. "We made your favorite, lasagna." I stood, smoothing my shirt. "Did you?" My voice was even, unreadable. She nodded quickly, then stepped aside as I walked past. At the table, Robert was already seated, the food steaming, the plates arranged. Amanda poured wine, her hands steady, her eyes calculating. We ate mostly in silence. Every so often she would glance at Robert as though prompting him to speak, but he didn't. He kept his eyes on his plate, his fork moving mechanically. Finally, he broke the quiet. "So, have you thought about the paperwork?" he asked, his tone light, almost casual. I set my fork down deliberately. "I have." His eyes brightened, and I leaned back, folded my arms. "And I'll decide when I'm ready. Not when you push, not when the bank pushes, when I am ready." His smile froze. Amanda cleared her throat, trying to smooth over the tension. "Mom, no one's pushing, we just—" I turned my gaze to her. "Don't lie to me, Amanda." My words cut, not shouted but firm. "You sit in silence while he insults me in my own home. You sit in silence while plans are made over my head. Silence may be easy for you, but for me, it's a choice. Remember that." Robert's face flushed, but he said nothing. The rest of the meal passed in strained quiet. When it ended, I excused myself, retreating once again to my bedroom. In the solitude of that room, I exhaled deeply. My pulse slowed, my mind steadied. Tonight had been a test, and they had shown me exactly who they were. Robert's push wasn't ambition, it was greed. Amanda's silence wasn't weakness. It was allegiance. And my silence, it was the sharpening of a blade they couldn't see. I turned off the desk lamp, the room falling into shadow. As I walked down the hallway toward the bathroom, I passed their closed door. I heard voices inside, low and urgent. "She won't hold out forever," Robert whispered. Amanda's reply was quieter, almost defeated. "I hope you're right." I stopped, hand resting against the wall, listening. The words stung, but they also solidified everything. My daughter wasn't just silent. She was complicit. The realization burned, then cooled into resolve. I walked on, the floor creaking beneath my steps. In my room, I set the locket on the nightstand, its silver gleaming softly in the dark. I lay back, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. They thought time was against me. They thought patience meant surrender, but what they didn't realize was that every moment brought me closer, not to defeat, but to the moment they would finally understand what silence can become when wielded by the woman they dismissed. And when that moment came, there would be no shouting, no chaos, just truth laid bare, undeniable. I closed my eyes, a small smile curling at the edge of my lips. The plan was beginning to take shape, and they didn't even know they had already lost. The morning light broke through the blinds, slicing the room into stripes of gold and shadow. I sat at the kitchen table, the same seat as always, with my tea cooling in front of me. The house was quiet, too quiet for a place that was supposed to be full of life. Amanda and Robert had left early, their absence, a relief I hadn't realized I craved. I leaned back, let the silence breathe around me, and then the phone rang. Not my cell, but the old landline on the wall, rare enough these days to make me pause. When I picked up, a familiar voice filled the line. "You still breathing, old friend?" I couldn't help the small smile. "Patricia, it's been too long." "Not long enough," she chuckled. Then her tone shifted. "Listen, I've been thinking about what you told me about the house, the pressure. I did a little digging." My fingers tightened around the receiver. "And?" "You're right. They've been making inquiries. The bank's on edge. Without your signature, they've got nothing. But if they get it, you're out. I mean, completely out." Quote, the words weren't new, but hearing them aloud still landed like a weight. "I expected as much," I murmured. "Look," Patricia continued, "if you want, I can connect you with my nephew. He's a lawyer. He could draw up protections, a trust, maybe something they can't touch, but you need to decide. And soon." I closed my eyes for a moment, listening to the steady hum on the line. "I'll come by," I said. "Tomorrow." After I hung up, I sat in the silence, letting the idea settle. Trust, protection, words that meant power, words that meant choice. Robert's smirk, Amanda's silence, their late-night whispers, they all echoed in my head. They thought I was powerless. They thought wrong. Later that afternoon, I stepped out of the house. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp leaves. I walked down to the small cafe on Oak Street, the one with hanging plants in the windows, and the same barista who had been serving coffee there for 10 years. As soon as I walked in, the bell jingled and a few heads turned. Small towns don't change much. Faces stay the same, even if the years etch deeper lines into them. I slid into a booth, ordered a black coffee, and waited. A few minutes later, Patricia walked in. She looked older too, but her handshake was still firm, steady. She sat across from me, dropping a manila folder on the table. "Everything you need to know," she said. I raised an eyebrow. "You work fast." She shrugged. "Some things deserve speed, especially when I hear the way your son-in-law talks." I frowned. "You heard?" "Word gets around. Small towns, remember? He's been less careful than he thinks." She leaned closer. "People talk when someone new struts around like they own the place. Especially when half the town remembers when your husband built that house with his own 2 hands." I sipped my coffee, let the warmth slide down my throat. "So it's not just me then. Others see it too." "Oh, they see it," Patricia said with a thin smile. "The trick is making sure they see you, not just the story he's trying to spin." I opened the folder, scanned the papers. Legal jargon, trust agreements, protective clauses. Each line, another layer of armor, another wall between me and the 2 people who thought they could erase me. "My nephew can meet you tomorrow," Patricia said, tapping a business card. "And this house becomes untouchable. They can live in it, sure, but control? Gone. It's yours until you say otherwise." I stared at the card. Taking it meant more than protection. It meant drawing a line, choosing a side. I thought of Amanda. Her downcast eyes, her silence that screamed louder than any insult. I thought of Robert, his voice sharp as broken glass. My name was on the deed. It would stay there. I took the card. When I slid it into my purse, I felt something shift inside me. A weight lifted, not because the battle was won, but because I had chosen to fight it. Patricia sipped her coffee, her eyes studying me over the rim. "Good," she said simply. "Now let's see how they react when the ground under their feet isn't as solid as they thought." We parted ways outside the cafe, the sun sinking low behind the trees. I walked home slowly, each step steady, deliberate. When I reached the house, Robert's car was already in the driveway. I paused at the porch, watching through the window. He was at the counter, pouring a drink, his shoulders stiff. Amanda sat at the table, her head in her hands. Even from here, I could tell something had gone wrong. I pushed open the door. The hinge creaked, and both their heads snapped up. Robert plastered on a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dinner's almost ready," he said. I hung my coat, moved past them without a word, and sat in the rocking chair. The old chair groaned under my weight, a sound Robert hated. I let it echo. Amanda cleared her throat. "Mom, we talked to the bank today." I looked at her evenly, and they said they need more than what we have. They need—" Her voice faltered. She didn't finish. "They need my signature." I supplied. Silence. Robert's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the glass so hard I thought it might shatter. "Yes," he said finally. "They need you. Just a formality." I let the quiet stretch, watching them squirm. Then I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "A formality," I repeated softly. "Is that what you told the banker? That the old woman would roll over? That I'd hand you the keys to everything without a word?" Robert opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "Don't. I've heard enough lies in this house to last me a lifetime." Amanda shifted in her seat, her face pale. "Mom, it's not—" "It is," I interrupted. "You wanted my silence to mean surrender, but it doesn't. It means I've been watching, listening, preparing." Robert scoffed, trying to regain control. "Preparing for what?" I stood slowly, deliberately, every inch of the motion carrying weight. "For the day you learn that this house doesn't belong to you. Not now, not ever." His smirk faltered just for a heartbeat. Amanda looked away, shame flickering across her face. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and let the sound of it fill the room. When I turned back, I said, "Enjoy dinner." Then I left them sitting there, their silence thicker than any words could be. Upstairs, I sat at my desk, the folder Patricia had given me now tucked safely away. Outside, the night deepened. The stars scattered across the sky like distant witnesses. From below, I heard muffled voices, urgent, angry, desperate. I didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. Plans unravel when the ground shifts. And tonight, I had shifted it. As I closed the window, the locket felt cool against my skin. Time was moving, yes, but not against me. For the first time in a long time, it moved with me. The day after I met with Patricia, the house carried a strange quiet. Robert moved around like a storm trapped in glass, slamming cupboards a little harder, letting doors shut with a snap, every movement speaking what his lips would not. Amanda, on the other hand, had grown quieter, as if her words had been stolen altogether. I watched them both from my chair, my presence ignored, but felt like the weight of a shadow they couldn't shake. By mid-morning, I decided to step out. There's a park not far from town, Richardson Park, where the benches are worn and the pond reflects the sky on clear days. I hadn't been there in years, but something in me needed the air, the open space. I walked slowly down the familiar paths, the crunch of gravel under my shoes like a rhythm I hadn't heard in too long. It was there, sitting on one of those benches, that I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "Don't tell me you've finally given up knitting and taken up walking instead." I turned, and there stood Sarah Campbell. We'd worked together at the hospital 30 years ago before I retired. She was older like me, her hair gone silver, her back not as straight as it once was, but her eyes, sharp as ever, lit up when she saw me. "Sarah," I said, standing to embrace her. "Well, I'll be damned." She laughed, a sound that pulled me back to the buzz of hospital corridors, the smell of disinfectant and coffee, the camaraderie of women who spent more time with each other than with their own families. We sat, and for a while, we simply caught up. Her kids, her grandkids, my Amanda. The silence that followed when I mentioned my daughter told her more than I wanted to say. Finally, Sarah leaned back, arms folded. "I've been hearing things," she said carefully. "About your house, about Robert." I looked out at the pond, the surface rippling in the wind. "People talk," I said. "They do," Sarah agreed. "And usually they're right. I heard he's been telling folks you're, well, living off them, that you're dead weight." The words didn't sting the way they might have a week ago. Not anymore. Now they only confirmed what I already knew. "He's mistaken," I said quietly. Sarah chuckled. "He doesn't know you very well then. You've been carrying people your whole life. You don't forget how to stand on your own." I smiled faintly. "You always did know how to read a situation." She leaned closer. "If you ever need a hand, you call me. I mean it. I've got friends. Old friends. Folks who remember who you are. Don't let them write you out of your own life." Her words hit deeper than she realized. Maybe it was the way she said friends who remember, because that's what I'd been missing. In that house I had been reduced to silence, to invisibility, but out here in the open, I was still me. Still the woman people knew, respected. Still the woman who had built, provided, and endured. As the afternoon sun stretched across the water, I promised myself something. I wouldn't fight this battle alone. Allies matter, even old ones, especially old ones. When I got home, Robert was at the counter, phone pressed to his ear. He turned his back when I walked in, his voice dropping. I didn't care to listen. Amanda sat at the table, hunched over, her face pale. She looked up when I entered, and for the first time in weeks, I saw something flicker in her eyes. Uncertainty. "Mom," she said hesitantly, "were you out today?" "Yes," I answered simply. "With who?" "An old friend." She hesitated, then nodded. She wanted to ask more, I could see it, but Robert's voice from the kitchen cut her off. "Don't bother, Amanda. She won't tell you anything useful." I looked at him, but he didn't turn around. Instead, he laughed lightly into the phone as though the whole world were his to command. That night, I sat in my bedroom again, the business card in my hand, my mind racing. The encounter with Sarah replayed over and over. Her words had planted a seed, and seeds have a way of growing if you give them time. I thought of allies, of networks, of voices that could counter the story Robert was spinning. He thought he was building influence, but influence can shift with one good push. The next day, I made that push. I drove into town, stopped by the local bank. The manager, Mrs. Reynolds, was an old acquaintance. She'd once been a young teller when I helped organize a charity drive for her son's medical expenses after a serious car accident. Now, she wore a tailored suit, her office lined with framed certificates. When she saw me, she stood, surprised. "It's been a long time," she said warmly. "It has," I replied. "I won't take much of your time." I sat across from her, laid out just enough to make the point. "My daughter and her husband, they've been trying to make arrangements, but I want to be clear. Nothing moves without my approval." Mrs. Reynolds nodded slowly. "I understand." Then her eyes narrowed. "You know they've been telling people the house is practically theirs already." I met her gaze evenly. "That's a story. Stories aren't facts. The facts are in my name." She leaned back, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Good to know. We'll keep that on record." As I left the bank, I felt something shift again. Not just leverage, but reputation. Robert's story might carry in whispers, but whispers can be drowned out by truth. That evening, back at the house, I found Amanda waiting in the kitchen, alone. She looked tired, worn down by the tug-of-war between silence and loyalty. "Mom?" she began, her voice quiet. "I didn't know you went to the bank." I poured myself a glass of water, said nothing. She rubbed her forehead. "Robert's furious. He thinks you're trying to cut us out." I turned to her then, my voice calm but firm. "Cut you out?" "No. Protect what's mine." "Yes, there's a difference." She flinched at the words, the truth too heavy for her to carry. "He just wants security," she muttered. "Security?" I repeated. "And what about mine?" She had no answer. The silence stretched heavy, pressing on both of us. Then Robert's voice floated from the hallway, sharp, demanding. "Amanda, come here." She glanced at me one last time. Her eyes clouded, then walked away. Later, alone in my room, I thought about that look. For a flicker of a moment, I wondered if there was still a piece of my daughter left, the girl who once promised to make me proud. But if she was still there, she was buried deep under his shadow. I touched the locket around my neck, the lock clicking under my fingers. Allies, leverage, patience. The pieces were forming. The storm wasn't far. Now, that night, I stood at the window watching the lights of town in the distance. Somewhere out there, Sarah was ready. Patricia and her nephew were ready. And soon, others would see the truth. Inside this house, they thought I was cornered. Outside, they would learn I was anything but. The locket felt cool against my skin. Each moment a reminder, time is not their ally, it's mine. And when the hour comes, They'll learn that silence can roar louder than any insult. The first sound I heard that morning was the faint hum of the printer in my bedroom, still warm from the night before. I had spent hours scanning, copying, and organizing every scrap of paper that tied me to this house. The deed, the tax records, the trust agreements Patricia's nephew had drawn up. They sat in neat stacks, no longer vulnerable to being lost or misplaced. If Robert thought he could build his story on convenience and manipulation, he would soon learn that my story was carved in ink and signatures too solid for him to bend. I carried the fresh copies to a fireproof box I'd bought years ago, back when my husband was still alive. He used to tease me for being overly cautious, but now, sliding those folders inside, I felt his voice in my ear. Better cautious than sorry. I locked the box, placed it under the bed, and for the first time in months, I breathed easier. When I walked into the kitchen, Amanda was at the stove frying eggs. The smell filled the air, rich and heavy, but it didn't cover the tension. She turned slightly when she heard me, her smile rehearsed too quick. "Morning," she said, as though last night had never happened. "Morning," I answered, my voice flat. Robert sat at the table, his tie loosened, his eyes down. He looked like a man carrying bricks on his back, each one heavier than the last. I poured my coffee, took a seat across from him. He glanced up, then quickly away. "Long night?" I asked. He nodded. "Work. Stress." The words came out clipped, hollow. Amanda slid the eggs onto a plate, her tone light. "Robert was up late going over finances. You know how much pressure we're under." I sipped my coffee slowly. "I know pressure," I said. "I carried it long before either of you had to." Her smile faltered for just a moment before returning. "Well, things change." "Yes," I agreed. "They do." The conversation ended there, but the silence was louder than words. Later that day, I drove into town. Patricia had arranged for me to meet her nephew, David, at his law office, a small building tucked between the pharmacy and a real estate agency. He had already prepared more paperwork, trust modifications, a will update, and contingency plans I hadn't even thought to consider. He laid them out on the desk with the precision of a man who had spent decades navigating other people's battles. "You're sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "More sure than I've ever been." He leaned back, studying me. "Your daughter, she knows you're doing this?" "She knows enough," I said. "She knows I won't be erased." We signed, sealed, and notarized until the folder grew thicker. By the time I left, I wasn't just protected. I was armed. On the drive home, I passed the hospital where I had worked for 30 years. It looked different now. Expanded, modernized. A gleaming new wing added to the east side, but seeing it reminded me of something. Even as places change, they hold the stories of those who built them. And I knew mine. That evening, back at the house, Robert cornered me in the hallway. He stepped close, his cologne overpowering, his voice low and cutting. "I don't know what game you're playing, but you're making things harder than they need to be." I looked at him, my face calm. "Life is hard, Robert. You'll get used to it." His eyes narrowed. "You think you can just sit there in that chair, holding on to your papers, and win? You don't know how this world works anymore." I let a faint smile cross my lips. "Don't I?" He huffed, spun on his heel, and walked away, his footsteps echoing. Amanda avoided me that night. She stayed in their bedroom, the sound of muted arguments slipping through the walls. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the script. He demanded, she complied. He pushed, she yielded. And me? I waited. The next morning I called Sarah. We met at the cafe again. Her handshake was as steady as before, her eyes sharp. "You look different," she said. "Lighter." "I'm prepared," I told her. She grinned. "Good, because words are spreading. People are starting to ask questions about Robert, about Amanda, about who owns what." I stirred my coffee, watching the swirl. "Let them ask. The truth will answer for me." Sarah leaned closer. "And when the time comes, I'll be there." You won't stand alone. Driving back, I thought about those words. Not alone. It had been so long since I'd felt that. For months, maybe years, I had carried the weight of betrayal and silence, believing no one could see it but me. But now, allies were stepping out of the shadows. Patricia with her connections, Sarah with her loyalty. Even the whispers in town were starting to shift. The tide was turning. At home, Robert greeted me with that same thin smile. Amanda hovered in the background, eyes avoiding mine. They were uneasy, though they tried to hide it. I could see it in the way Robert tapped his fingers against the counter, in the way Amanda's shoulders sagged. They knew something had changed, even if they couldn't name it yet. That night, as I sat in my rocking chair, Robert finally snapped. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, voice sharp. You think you're clever, don't you? Walking around with your secrets, whispering with your old friends, making trips to the bank like we don't notice. I looked up at him slowly. You notice plenty, Robert. Just not enough. His face flushed. You can't keep this up forever. Amanda and I are the future. You're just the past clinging to walls that won't hold. Amanda stepped into the room then, her voice tense. Robert, that's enough. It was the first time in weeks she had raised her voice at him. He turned on her, furious, but I caught her eye. For a fleeting moment I saw a spark. The girl I once knew still there, buried under layers of fear and silence. But it was gone as quickly as it came. She lowered her head, muttered something I couldn't hear, and followed him out. I sat in the quiet afterward, the clock ticking, the house settling around me. Their anger didn't rattle me. If anything, it confirmed what I already knew. The pressure was working. My silence was no longer their comfort. It was their fear. I rose, walked back to my bedroom, and opened the drawer. The folder lay there, thick and heavy, a fortress of paper. I touched the cover gently, then closed it again. Not yet. Timing mattered, and I had time. As I turned off the lamp, I heard the faint sound of rain against the window. The house was dark, but in that darkness I felt something like peace. They thought they had me cornered. What they didn't understand was that I was the one who had been drawing the map all along. The locket rested against my skin, warm now from my body heat. Every second that passed was not a loss, but a step closer. Soon they would learn that silence can be the sharpest weapon of all. The first crack in their facade didn't come from me. It came from outside, as most cracks do. Quiet at first, then spreading until the whole wall trembles. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the phone rang in the kitchen. I wasn't meant to hear it, but walls don't keep out the truth. Amanda answered, her voice low, urgent. What do you mean the contractor's pulling out? They can't do that. We have a deposit coming. There was a pause. Then her tone rose, sharper. Well, who told them we didn't own the property outright? That's not their concern. We're managing it. It's ours. The silence that followed was so long I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. Then she hissed. Fine, we'll fix it. Just don't cancel yet. She hung up hard enough to rattle the picture frame on the wall. A moment later, she stormed into the living room where I sat in the rocking chair, the newspaper spread open on my lap. You, she snapped. What have you been telling people? I folded the paper calmly, met her eyes. The truth. Her face flushed. You've poisoned the well. Now no one wants to work with us. You think this is funny? You think you can just sit there and ruin everything? I set the paper aside, my voice steady. I don't need to ruin anything, Amanda. Lies collapse on their own. Robert came in then, drawn by the raised voices. He looked from her to me, his jaw tight. What happened? Amanda whirled on him. Our contractor just backed out. They said they can't risk dealing with us until the ownership's clarified. Robert's shoulders slumped. He rubbed his temples, muttering, God, not this again. I watched him carefully. It will be this again and again until you learn the difference between stories and facts. He glanced at me, then quickly away. Amanda's glare could have cut glass. This isn't over, she said through clenched teeth. No, I agreed softly. It's only beginning. That night, I heard them arguing behind their closed door. Words like trust, signature, and leverage drifted through the walls. At one point, Amanda's voice broke into a sharp cry. She's doing this on purpose. She's sabotaging us. Robert's reply was muffled, weary. I didn't need to hear the words to know the tone. It was the sound of a man cornered, pulled between ambition and reality. The following day, the tension thickened. Amanda barely looked at me. Robert left early, came home late, the silence between us growing heavier, but outside these walls the whispers had started to spread. At the cafe, I overheard two neighbors talking. "Heard the bank shut them down," one said. "Guess the old lady still holds the cards," replied the other. I sipped my coffee quietly, saying nothing. But inside, I felt the tide turning. Later that week, Sarah stopped by. She knocked once, then let herself in the way old friends do. Amanda's eyes narrowed when she saw her standing in the living room, but she pasted on her brittle smile. "Can I help you?" "No," Sarah said flatly. "I'm here for her." She nodded toward me. We stepped onto the porch, the evening air cool against my skin. She leaned against the railing, lowering her voice. "You should know. People are starting to take sides. Word's out that Robert's been telling folks you're a burden, but others are saying you're the one holding this place together." I nodded slowly. Truth has a way of surfacing. She smiled faintly. "Keep steady. They're cracking, I can see it." As she left, Amanda stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes cold. "You're rallying people," she accused. I looked at her, unflinching. "I don't need to rally anyone, I just let people see." Her lips curled into a sneer. "Enjoy your little victories. They won't last." But even she didn't sound convinced. The next blow came quicker than I expected. A letter arrived in the mail addressed to Robert. I saw the logo before he snatched it from the counter. Another bank. Another denial. He crumpled the paper in his fist, his face pale. Amanda ripped it away from him, scanned the words, then slammed it down. "This is because of her," she shouted, pointing at me. "She's pulling strings, talking to people, ruining everything." I stayed calm, sipping my tea. I didn't ruin anything. The bank just did its job. Robert's voice broke then, anger spilling out. "God, Mom, why can't you just help us? Why do you have to make this harder?" His slip didn't escape me. In his frustration, he'd called me Mom for the first time. I set the mug down, met his eyes. "Help you? I gave you this house to live in. I gave you years. And what did I get in return? Silence. Betrayal. You want more? Earn it." His face twisted, torn between shame and anger. Amanda grabbed his arm, hissing, "Don't listen to her. She's manipulating you." But the seed was already planted. I saw it in his eyes. Doubt. That evening, after they shut themselves in their room again, I sat alone with the locket in my hand. Its weight matched the rhythm of my thoughts. Each second was another reminder that patience pays. Pressure doesn't have to be loud. It can be quiet, steady, relentless, like water against stone carving deep over time. The next morning I received a call from David, Patricia's nephew. His voice was calm, but there was an edge of satisfaction. "They tried again," he said. "Another attempt to file for credit. Blocked. My office flagged it. They're running out of options." "Good," I replied. "Careful though," he warned. "Desperation makes people reckless." He wasn't wrong. That night, Robert confronted me outright. He stood in the living room, his eyes blazing. "You think you're clever, don't you? Cutting us off from every angle. Do you enjoy this? Watching us struggle?" I met his fury with stillness. Struggle teaches lessons. Nothing else can. Amanda stood behind him, her face pale. She said nothing, but her silence screamed louder than words. Robert took a step closer, his voice a hiss. "You won't win. I'll make sure of it." I looked at him calmly, then leaned back in my chair. "You already lost, Robert. You just don't know it yet." His hand trembled, his jaw clenched. He spun on his heel, dragging Amanda with him, the slam of their door echoing down the hallway. I stayed in the quiet, the clock ticking on the wall. The first strike had landed. Their plans were unraveling, their confidence cracking, and I hadn't raised my voice once. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of my husband again. I wondered what he'd say if he saw all this. I imagined his smile, soft but firm, and his words, "Patience, always patience." He would understand. He always did. The rain began to fall outside, tapping against the window like fingers drumming on glass. I listened to it, steady and sure, until sleep finally came. When morning broke, I rose with a calm I hadn't felt in years. The tide was turning, and they knew it. Pressure was building, quiet but unstoppable. And soon the walls they had built with arrogance and lies would come crashing down. The locket felt warm against my skin, steady as ever. Time was mine now, and with each passing second, their silence grew louder, their fear sharper. The reckoning had begun. The first sign that the storm was near came from someone I never expected. It was a Saturday morning, the kind that should have been ordinary. The house smelled of coffee and toast, sunlight falling across the kitchen floor. Robert was silent, his anger still simmering from the arguments of the past week. Amanda sat at the table, her shoulders hunched, pushing toast around her plate without eating. I was in my usual chair, the locket resting against my skin, its presence steady as breath. Then came the knock at the door. Amanda's head snapped up, irritation flashing across her face. "Who visits at this hour?" she muttered, pushing back from the counter. She opened the door and froze. Standing there was her younger brother, Michael. Michael was taller, with the same hazel eyes as Amanda, but a gentler expression. I hadn't seen him in nearly a year, not since last Christmas when he'd flown in from Seattle for a brief visit. He stepped inside, his voice calm but edged with something Amanda didn't want to hear. "Amanda," he said, "we need to talk." Amanda's smile was brittle, her voice tight. "What are you doing here?" Michael's gaze shifted past her, landing on me. "I wanted to see Mom," he said plainly. The room stilled. Amanda's jaw tightened. "Why?" Michael walked closer, his eyes steady on mine. "Because I've been hearing things, and I don't like lies." Robert hissed under his breath. "Not here. Not now." But Michael ignored him. He pulled out a chair, sat across from me. "You've been called dead weight. They say you're dragging them down. But people in town are saying something different. That you're the one holding this house together." I studied his face. There was no malice there, no calculation, just a quiet honesty rare in this house. "And what do you believe?" "Quote," I asked. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I believe the woman who raised us, who worked double shifts to put me through college, isn't the kind to leech off anyone. I believe my brother-in-law's been twisting the truth." Robert slammed his palm on the counter. "That's enough, Michael. You don't know what you're talking about." Michael turned, his tone cold. "I know enough. I know you've been telling people things that aren't true. I know you've been trying to push her out." Amanda shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between them. She opened her mouth, but Robert cut her off. "Amanda, don't just stand there. Tell him. Tell him how hard this has been for us. Tell him we need this house." But Amanda didn't speak. She stared at the floor, her silence louder than ever. Michael shook his head. "That's what I thought." He looked back at me. "If you ever need someone to speak the truth, you call me. I won't let him tarnish your name." Robert's face flushed red, his voice trembling with fury. "You're siding with her, over your sister?" Michael stood, his voice sharp. "I'm siding with what's right." The silence after he left was thick, suffocating. Robert stood frozen, his hands clenched. Amanda still didn't look up. I simply sat there, the locket warm against my skin, a faint smile curling at the edge of my lips. The tide was shifting. Someone from her bloodline had chosen to stand on my side. That night, the house was heavy with tension. Robert barely spoke to Amanda, his anger spilling out in slammed doors and clipped footsteps. Amanda drank more than usual, nursing a glass of wine at the table long after he'd gone to bed. I sat across from her, the lamp casting shadows on the walls. She stared into her glass. "He thinks you're orchestrating all of this," she muttered. I watched her carefully. "And what do you think?" Her jaw tightened. "I don't know what to think anymore." She looked up at me, her eyes tired. "I just know everything's falling apart." "Things fall apart when they're built on lies," I said quietly. She flinched at the words, looked away. After a long silence, she whispered, "Sometimes I wonder if I made the wrong choice." I leaned forward. "It's never too late to make the right one." But she didn't answer. She finished her drink, stood, and walked slowly down the hall. The days that followed carried the weight of change. Whispers in town grew louder. At the cafe, people no longer lowered their voices when they spoke of Robert. "He's overreached," one woman said, "trying to take what isn't his." Another nodded. "But the mother? She's steady. She knows what she's doing." I didn't need to add my voice. The community was speaking for me now, and Robert felt it. Every time he walked through town, his shoulders stiffened, his smile forced. He could feel the shift, even if he wouldn't admit it. One evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat on the porch, the air heavy with the smell of rain. Michael came by again, bringing a small potted plant. Lavender, my favorite. He sat beside me, staring out at the yard. For a while we said nothing. Then he sighed. "Mom," he said, his voice low, "do you ever think about Dad? About what he'd say if he saw all this?" I touched the locket, remembering the photo of my husband inside. "Every day." He swallowed hard. "I think about him too, and I know he wouldn't want it like this." I looked at him, searching his face. There was pain there, but also determination, a strength I'd always known he possessed. "Why did you come back now?" I asked. He didn't answer right away. Finally he said, "Because Sarah called me. She told me what was happening. And I realized I'd been absent when you needed me most." The words hung between us, heavy and healing. I reached over, squeezed his hand. "You're here now. That matters." Robert's voice called from inside. Sharp, commanding. "Michael, if you're trying to turn her against us, you can leave right now." Michael's jaw tightened, but he remained seated. "I'm visiting my mother," he called back, "and I'll leave when she asks me to." I stayed on the porch with my son, listening to the cicadas start their nightly chorus. The sky darkened, and the first stars appeared. I closed my eyes, breathing in the cool air. The cracks were widening. It was only a matter of time before the whole facade collapsed. Later that night, I sat in my bedroom writing in a leather-bound journal I hadn't touched in years. I wrote of the insults, the betrayals, the silence that had cut deeper than words. But I also wrote of the strength I still held, the allies who had stepped forward, the truth that was slowly surfacing. The pen moved steadily, each word a piece of armor, each page a shield. When I finished, I placed the journal beside the folder of documents. Evidence and memory side by side, facts and feelings both ready when the time came. "It's time," David said simply. Amanda's voice cracked. "Time for what?" David laid the folder on the table, opening it with deliberate care. "These are the protections your mother put in place. The trust, the deeds, the filings. Legally, this house is hers and untouchable. Nothing you've tried has changed that." Robert's face went pale, his lips parting without sound. Amanda sank into a chair, her head in her hands. I spoke then, my voice quiet but sharp. I was silent because I was patient. I let you think you were winning, let you believe I was weak. But now you see the truth. I am not dead weight. I am the foundation you've tried to erase. Robert trembled, his fury collapsing into something like fear. "You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. "And I have." The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the clock filled the air. As David left, Michael stayed behind. He stood beside me, his presence solid, unshakable. Robert looked between us, then grabbed his coat. "This isn't over," he snarled and stormed out. The front doors slammed, echoing through the house. Amanda remained seated, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I looked at her, this daughter, who had once been my whole world, the girl who had drifted so far that I barely recognized her. And yet, beneath the pain and betrayal, something tugged at my heart. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a flicker of possibility. Michael squeezed my shoulder, then walked over to his sister. He knelt beside her chair, placed a hand on her arm. "It's not too late," he said quietly. "Not if you choose differently now." She looked up, her face streaked with tears. "How? After everything?" I stepped forward, my voice softer than it had been in months. "By remembering who you are, not who he wanted you to be." She stared at me, years of tension hanging between us. Then, slowly, she nodded. That night, the house was quiet in a way it hadn't been in years. Robert didn't return. Michael slept in the guest room, and Amanda sat at the kitchen table long after the lights dimmed, staring at nothing. I joined her, the silence between us different now. Not cold, but cautious. "I'm sorry," she finally whispered. "I don't even know when I started to forget who I was." I reached across the table, took her hand. It happened slowly, and then all at once. The unlearning happens the same way. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "Can we fix this?" I squeezed her hand, felt the warmth return. Not overnight, but yes, brick by brick, we can rebuild. When I finally closed my eyes that night, I thought of my husband again. His voice in my memory, soft but steady. Patience, always patience. And I smiled, because patience had brought me here, to the moment where the lies lay in ruins and the truth stood taller than ever. The morning after David left the house in stunned silence, I woke earlier than usual. The sun had barely broken the horizon, and the light that spilled across the kitchen felt new, hopeful, as though even the day itself knew something had changed. I brewed coffee the way I always did, the sound of the machine familiar, grounding. But the house felt different, lighter somehow, as though a great weight had been lifted. Michael joined me first, his smile warm as he poured his own cup. "How did you sleep?" he asked. "Better than I have in years," I admitted. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the day brighten outside the window. Then Amanda appeared, her steps hesitant, her eyes still swollen from a night of tears. "Coffee?" I offered. She nodded, took the mug I handed her. Our fingers brushed, a small touch that spoke volumes. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a sip, considering. "Now we rebuild. Not just the trust, but the truth." Michael leaned forward. "And Robert?" Amanda's gaze dropped to the table. "He called last night. Said he's staying with a friend. He wants to talk about separation." I nodded, not surprised. Men like Robert didn't rebuild. They retreated, looked for new foundations to undermine. "And what do you want?" I asked her. She looked up, her eyes clearer than they had been in months. "To remember who I am, who we were, before all this." The weeks that followed were not easy. Robert returned once, to collect some clothes, his eyes hard, his words sharp, but they glanced off us now, powerless. Amanda filed for separation, then divorce. The bank foreclosed on Robert's business loan, the one he'd been hiding, the one he'd planned to secure with my house. The whispers in town shifted again, from scandal to respect. Michael stayed longer than planned, helping Amanda move into a small apartment above the bookstore downtown. Close enough to visit, far enough to stand on her own. She found a job at the hospital, started therapy, began the slow work of finding her voice again. And me? I reclaimed my house, room by room. The kitchen first, filling it with the smell of fresh bread and brewing coffee. Then the living room, rearranging furniture, hanging old photos that had been stored away. My bedroom remained a sanctuary, but now its door stood open more often than closed. One evening, nearly 3 months after that final confrontation, Amanda came for dinner. She brought flowers, peonies, my favorite, and a small wrapped package. We ate on the porch, the summer air sweet around us. Michael had returned to Seattle by then, but his presence lingered in the calls, the texts, the promise of Christmas visits. After the meal, Amanda handed me the package, her hand slightly trembling. "I found this," she said, "when I was packing." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a small wooden box, handcrafted, the lid inlaid with mother of pearl. I recognized it immediately, my jewelry box, the one that had disappeared years ago. "Robert took it," she admitted, her voice tight with shame. "He said it was worthless, just old junk. But I always knew it was yours." I should have spoken up then. I opened the box. Inside lay the treasures of a lifetime. My wedding ring, earrings from my mother, tiny pins from nursing school graduations. Each piece a story, a memory, a testament to a life built with purpose. "Thank you," I said simply. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm learning to speak again," she said. "Really speak, not just echo." I reached over, took her hand. That's the hardest lesson. Finding your voice after giving it away. We sat there as the sun set, the silence between us comfortable now. Healing. The locket rested against my skin, warm and steady, a reminder that some foundations cannot be shaken. The town moved on, as towns do. Robert left for the city, his reputation trailing behind him like a shadow. Amanda rebuilt slowly, carefully, brick by brick. And I remained, my roots deep in the soil of a house that had witnessed both betrayal and redemption. When winter came, bringing snow and early darkness, Michael returned as promised. Amanda joined us for Christmas Eve dinner, bringing a new friend, a quiet woman with kind eyes and a gentle laugh. The table was full again, not with tension but with cautious joy. As we sat around the fire afterward, Michael raised his glass. "To Mom," he said, "who taught us that silence isn't always surrender, sometimes it's strength gathering." Amanda lifted her glass, her eyes meeting mine. "To patience," she added, "and second chances." I touched the locket at my throat, felt the steady beat of my heart beneath it. In that moment, I knew that some battles are won not with shouting, not with force, but with the quiet power of patience and truth. The house settled around us, warm and secure. Outside, snow fell gently, covering the world in white. Inside, we had found our voices again. Different now, stronger for having been tested. And as I looked at my children, I felt a peace that had been long in coming. They had thought my silence meant weakness. They had learned, at last, that it meant wisdom. That sometimes the strongest voice is the one that waits for the right moment to speak. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.